I'm delighted and honored to be here. I wouldn't have missed it for anything, because what Islamic finance needs is more innovation. And I'm sure that out of your 3 days, and I've seen the program, will come some ideas, some concepts, and some business models, and some suggestions to innovate in Islamic finance. Innovation is very important. Islamic finance has always been about innovation because it's a private sector phenomenon. It represents the corporate social responsibility trend and aspiration of the Muslim middle class. It was not started by a royal edict or by a central bank circular. It was started by consumers who wanted an authentic Sharia-based proposition. To understand Islamic finance, you must read a book by Malcolm Gladwell called Tipping Point. Tipping Point is about how a concept becomes a movement, how a movement becomes an industry, and how an industry leads the growth and evolution. So Islamic finance has always been about innovation. When you are a new player, you have to innovate, you have to create space. One of the fathers of innovation in modern times in terms of psychology is a man called Dr. Edward de Bono, who is one of my favorites. And in one of his books, he talks about innovation, and he says the human mind is brilliantly uncreative. Now, this is a paradoxical statement. Let me explain. How can something be brilliant, be uncreative? Normally, we assume brilliance with creativity. But Dr. de Bono is saying the human mind is brilliantly uncreative. It is brilliant because it has got memory groups. And it is uncreative because under normal circumstances, the human mind does not create new things. It likes to coast along. It needs provocation. Great inventions in human society have taken place under provocation, under needs. And so have in Islamic finance, there has been a need-driven innovation. So in Malaysia, pilgrims wanted to go to Hajj, and there was no organization to encourage people. So it took a royal professor, Tunku Aziz, the father of the current governor of Central Bank of Malaysia, Her Excellency Tan Sri Zeti Aziz, to come up with a paper and take it to the parliament and to establish the Munhaj. And that's an example of an Islamic institution being created by need. Similarly, many changes in the Sharia documentation and structures which you would have gone through. So, for example, I remember Dr. Dar, liquidated damages. The fatwa on liquidated damages was given by Sheikh Khatir. And liquidated damages, under what circumstances can you actually charge a penal rate where the client has defaulted not because of a difficulty, but because of being, doing an activity to trick the bank for fraud reasons, or because clients have relationships with conventional banks and Islamic banks, and because Islamic banks cannot charge additional amount for delays and defaults, therefore delay the payment to the Islamic bank. And Sheikh Khatir Muhammad Al-Khatir, one of the founders of the great industry in terms of Sharia scholars, he was the Grand Mufti of Egypt. They used to call him Mufti Diyar al-Misriya, the Grand Egypt, the Greater Egypt, Egypt and Sudan. He came up with this whole fatwa on liquidated damages. Similarly, I believe the fatwa on equities was an important need-driven. How can Islamic finance industry grow when our asset management portfolios cannot have an allocation for equities as an asset class? I remember taking Sheikh Khadir to some of the industries. We knew which medication he was taking, which Swiss companies he was, the medication he was on, so we took him to those medical companies and said, Sheikh, you want to invest into these companies? He said, it's a very good idea. We took him to Mercedes-Benz, Daimler, Chrysler, other companies. But the difficulty was that these stocks had debt and other things. And it led to a thinking amongst the scholars which came up with the whole guideline on investing in equities. These are all examples of need-based innovation. So Islamic finance industry has evolved in a conventional banking framework, and it had to adjust to the reality of the marketplace. So this was an adjustment within the conventional banking framework. So the innovation which took place was need-based innovation. However, for innovation to be longer lasting, you need to have an innovation which is based on authenticity. For Islamic finance to have an authenticity-based innovation, you need a framework, you need guidelines. Today, if you look around, the conventional banking framework is designed for conventional banking products, and it is designed for debt products. So the entire banking system and the entire incentive system of the Western world, which the Islamic world has more or less copied. So when you have debt, you are incentivized to have debt. So if you have a mortgage, if you have debt, you get tax credits for that. When you save, you get penalized. Savings and investments are penalized. So this leads to the creation and orientation of debt-based culture. Many of the large companies and institutions, they do what is called tax treaty shopping. So what are they doing? They are trying to shelter their profits from taxation. And the sheltering of the taxation profits takes place on debt-based contracts. And hence, most of the innovation which took place in the Western banking system took place in the debt-based universe, not the equity-based universe. Even the private equity universe was linked in many ways to preference shares, to debt-based contracts. Therefore, for Islamic finance to progress, we need to look at holistically what needs to be done, what can happen. The current crisis has brought a lot of focus and has put Islamic finance firmly on the agenda. So at the G20 meeting, there were 3 Islamic countries represented in London. Indonesia, the largest Muslim country, Turkey, the largest economy, and of course, Saudi Arabia. And at the G20 meetings, in one of the side discussions, there was a whole discussion, can Islamic finance come up with innovative products which can create solutions? No crisis can be solved at the level at which it was created. No problem in life. To solve a problem, you have to rise higher and above the problem. All material problems cannot be solved just by more material solutions alone, but you need a moral solution. I believe that the current crisis to be solved, you can't out-borrow and out-spend your way out of this crisis. We have to save and invest our way out of this crisis. Islamic finance has opened up a debate on the very nature of banking. And today there are discussions amongst policy setters, policy designers, and policy executioners about the financial architecture of the world. The financial architecture in which banking is being looked at, how do we make sure that financial intermediation and the payment system are differentiated, are separated. Today, Glass-Steagall Act, which was put into place after the Great Depression, after the stock market collapse, after the bubble of 1929, that has been chiseled away, that had been destroyed and broken. And one of the reasons why this crisis has taken place is because the separation between financial intermediation and payment system, the separation between commercial banking and investment banking has totally disappeared. Now, there is a case for narrow banking, i.e. saying that there are those banks which will perform the payment system. They will control the payment system. They will be protected by taxpayers' money. And these banks will be the banks where people put their money for safekeeping. You want the state to protect your money, and the state will bail these banks out. The state will tell them that if I am going to rescue this industry by taxpayers' money, then I have the right to tell you where you invest, what you invest, and how you invest. And this whole system called narrow banking is then saying there should be a separate function for investment banking, for asset management, or for what we call in Islamic finance a mudaraba-based banking. And the real innovation in Islamic finance and the real authenticity in Islamic finance will come from a Mudaraba-based banking system. A Mudaraba-based banking system in which financial intermediation based on varying types of risks and returns is set up, where there are those who would want to take a risk in infrastructure, and there are those who would like to take a risk on private equity, and there are those who would like to take a risk only on trade transactions, commodity and good transactions. All these three different types of risks and different types of returns. And people will then invest and choose to invest into these models. And therefore, this type of financial intermediation, which is based on Mudaraba, which is based on asset management contracts, will take us away from the debt-based financial intermediation. And then we have to address the whole issue of incentives. Debt should not be incentivized by giving taxpayers money. Savings should be incentivized. Investment should be incentivized so that we can build long-term sustainability into our economies. Now, this kind of a shift is the shift from Sharia compliant banking, where currently we exist in Islamic finance industry, in a conventional banking framework, in which in some countries like Malaysia, a level playing field has been created for Islamic finance, or in the process of being created in many of the GCC countries. In many other Islamic countries, including the CIS countries, countries in North Africa, there is no level playing field for Islamic finance. To be an Islamic financial institution in these countries is to be at a disadvantage. And when you are at a disadvantage, you cannot innovate. You have to just adjust to the demands of the conventional banking framework. So innovation is driven from the macro level, and policyholders today are talking about those changes. At the micro level, so we start with the country. The Islamic countries are gradually looking at the guidelines issued by Islamic Financial Services Board in Kuala Lumpur, by the Accounting and Auditing Organization of Islamic Financial Institutions in Bahrain, and other industry building bodies to make sure, again, a level playing field is created for Islamic banking products and services in these markets. But similarly, within Islamic institutions, there is a need to look at innovation. And how do you look at innovation? You look at innovation within institutions by creating multidisciplinary approach to innovation. It is not just the objective of the Sharia board or the product team or the client services team or the senior management. It has to be a comprehensive, holistic effort to create innovation. Many leading Islamic institutions are creating what is called Sharia incubators, where you have a test and learn culture, where you can look at products, test them out. And when you look at innovation from within an Islamic institution, you look at not only products and services, but you also look at business design. You also look at your IT infrastructure, your product platforms. How can you make something faster, cheaper, and better? Information technology will drive innovation in the financial services industry. The financial services industry, which has been partly nationalized in most part of the world, through either equity infusions or liquidity infusions, will continue to change. And the change would be driven by those institutions where there is technology which makes it the faster, cheaper, better platforms possible. So Sharia incubators will become a very, very important area. Many of the leading institutions will follow from other industries. So for example, some of the best engineering industries have got a program called concurrent engineering. Concurrent engineering, very simply put together, is nothing but different parts of the product proposition teams working together So the product team, the services team, the marketing team, the accounting team, the risk are all working together to launch new products which meet the requirement of the customers. In the industry, there is a need for more research and training center. The reality is that the Islamic finance industry, however fast it is growing, and however many conferences we have, lacks platform such as the institute, where Islamic bankers can sit and talk to each other. There are a lot of conferences and programs where Islamic bankers come and talk at each other, but not to each other. So we need more workshops like this. We need more roundtable conferences, meetings, where people can sit down and focus in great details. So the Harvard Islamic Finance Project does a program with LSE once a year, where they go and drill deep into one issue. So last year they looked at supports, for example, and you prepare position papers and you can see how you can drive greater authenticity into this area. So I feel that there is a need for applied research in Islamic finance. But as the history of science teaches us, the greatest innovation happened in science not because of applied science, but because of pure science. People went and they were looking for what makes things better, and they were just inquiring about things. So creating a culture of test and learn, creating a budget within these organizations for R&D is very important. The Islamic finance industry today has inappropriate levels of funding for research and development, in my view. We need to up it in order to play a leadership role and in order to make sure that we have a demonstrable, viable model which we can say that this system and this model really works. We often talk about a system based on ethics, morality, corporate social responsibility is certainly superior than a system which is not based on that. But that system has the responsibility to create viable models. And I believe that programs such as yours and courses such as these run by the Institute will go a long way, inshallah, in creating innovation and change and progress in the Islamic finance industry. I feel that I'm deeply honored and I would like to hear from you, and if you have any questions or comments on what I have said or anything else you would like to talk about while we have some time. But I would again like to reiterate that I wouldn't have missed this event for anything. So greatly, very, very privileged to be here. And if you have any questions or comments, I'm very happy to take that.